This is a final presentation for the Environmental and Occupational Health course 5102 at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. This is a student presentation using a hypothetical scenario for educational purposes. The presenter is a student at UAMS, not a representative of the agency named in the following slides. The information contained herein does not necessarily reflect the views of said agency. My name is Gracie Cape, and I am an occupational health consultant. And today I will be discussing occupational biohazards, specifically some of those working in the fields of construction, farming, and/or gardening. And the topics covered will by no means be an exhaustive list of the hazards encountered in these areas, but they're just something to think about and start the conversation regarding these hazards that need to be looked out for. Okay, so again, the main points of this discussion will be to touch on hazards in the field of construction work, gardening, and farming, what to look out for with your own health, if anything new pops up while you're in these fields, and then different ways to protect yourself. And again, this is not an exhaustive presentation, and we will not be discussing bloodborne pathogens in this. So we will go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start with hazards in construction, and the following are some common construction hazards, as mentioned by the Encyclopedia of Health and Safety. So there are many different inhalation hazards, things like silica dust from concrete, and below we have an image of a healthy lung compared to one who has had chronic exposure to silica dust and what it can do. Wood dust in construction is also a major issue for the lungs, as well as things like asbestos, solvents, lead paint, and welding fumes. All of these can cause widespread detrimental effects to human health. Heavy loads can cause many musculoskeletal problems like herniated discs, compression fractures, and things of that nature. Excessive noise can cause tinnitus, and hearing loss. Falls from things like ladders or tall buildings can cause fractures and other injuries. Struck by injuries are also a big problem in construction. So if someone's operating equipment like a forklift or driving a truck and they aren't paying attention, or the people outside of the vehicle aren't paying attention, they could get struck by them. And this can also cause serious life-threatening injuries. Vibration injuries from things such as a jackhammer can also be detrimental to health and cause injury. Electrical injuries are also an issue, and can cause burns. Heat exhaustion or heat stroke is also a major concern when one overexerts themselves and hasn't taken a good break and is not hydrated. Heat stroke can be a life-threatening complication. And then cement dermatitis is another example of a skin finding that can happen in construction. So when one has direct contact to the skin with wet cement, it can cause dermatitis as shown as in this picture, and it can cause a burn. So things to look out for. So if you notice changes in your breathing patterns, like you develop a continuous coughing or a new wheeze, or if you develop chest pain, new chest tightness, or a dry throat that you can't get rid of, all of these things are things you want to look out for and potentially go visit your physician for if you're in construction and these are new findings that you've never had before. Could be a sign of a health issue. And then excessive noise can cause ringing in the ears, again called tinnitus, or ear pain after long days at work. Could be signs of hearing damage in construction. And then you always want to watch out for sunburns, chemical burns on your skin as well. Again, not an exhaustive list, but these are just things to think about and be aware of. So I wanted to touch on more about noise exposures in construction. So the CDC states that people should aim to keep their environmental noise exposure under 70 decibels. which is about the level of a washing machine, and over 24 hours to prevent hearing loss. And as we can see by this infographic, um, construction often has people working at decibel levels much higher than this. So ironwork, 91.1 decibels, carpentry, 89.3 decibels, the jackhammer, 89.1, masonry, 88.5, welding, 88.4, and an electrician, 86.7. So all of these are above that recommended noise level, and so put construction workers at increased risk for hearing loss. So ways to protect yourself from in construction. So some of these are examples mentioned by the American National Standards Institute, as well as Safety Culture. Just some basic things to protect yourself, like wearing PPE on site. So a helmet, steel-toed shoes, earmuffs, goggles, gloves, high visibility vests, and things of that nature. Making sure you organize and store your tools properly and make sure they work well so that there's no mechanical error on that side of things. Making sure everyone follows instructions on the job site and that there's clear communication so that you avoid injuries that way. Keeping the job site clean, this can help with falls and trips, things like that. Always being vigilant on the job site of your surroundings, who's around you, what vehicles and equipment, etc. Having an emergency response plan if things do go awry on the job site is also a great way to protect yourself. And then always following safeguards for equipment and various things on the site. And then this is just a little infographic depicting 6 ways to protect your hearing according to the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. Limiting noise exposure, wearing earmuffs, sound barriers, on-site safety, noise canceling equipment, as well as scheduling regular hearing tests can help. Okay, so moving on, we're now going to talk about hazards in gardening. So some of the common hazards faced in gardening, according to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, include things such as prolonged sun exposure, and some of this overlaps with construction. So again, prolonged sun exposure can lead to sunburns, as well as heat exhaustion or heat stroke, which is life-threatening. And then in the garden, you're more susceptible to insect stings and bites, and this could potentially lead to insect-borne diseases. There's also other critters like snakes, spiders, scorpions, things like that. Fertilizer can also have some chemicals in it that we do not want to ingest. It can cause poisonings. And then there are poisonous plants that people plant in the garden that, if they're not aware of, could cause problems. Cuts and scrapes are always an issue. And then excessive noise and equipment injury are another problem in gardening, as well as Legionella can grow in potting mix. And it's important to be aware of that, bagged potting mix in particular. And then if someone steps on a rusty nail or something that they didn't see in the dirt, tetanus is another concern. And then so things to watch out for, excessive sweating, feeling faint or dizzy, or like you might pass out, may be a sign that you've overexerted yourself and you need to take a break and hydrate and get out of the sun. And then it's always important to avoid sunburns that peel or progress to a blister. This could lead to skin cancer. New symptoms that appear after getting an insect bite or sting. So in this photo, it's depicting the characteristic bullseye rash of Lyme disease, which is carried by ticks, and it's something that can cause systemic effects to the human body. And so if you get a new insect bite or sting, you want to note down any new changes that you notice after that. And then puncture wounds on the hand or feet, it's important to visit your physician for potential tetanus. So then ways to protect yourself, Good Housekeeping mentions a few ways to protect yourself in gardening, things like wearing proper protection. So gloves, hat, long sleeves and pants, tall socks, sunglasses. These things can protect you from the sun as well as bugs or scrapes and things of that nature. Using sunscreen and bug spray can help. Staying hydrated and drinking plenty of water is always a good practice when working outside for long periods of time. And then after you work in the garden for a long time, inspecting yourself for any bites or ticks that you may have gotten along the way. And then if you do sustain a puncture wound, it's important to go to your physician and get a tetanus shot. And then on the right, here's just an infographic about keeping yourself safe from Legionnaire's disease that can be found in compost and potting mix. So always work outside when you're using compost or potting mix. Use a mask and wear gloves. And then don't rip the bag open. Prevents the dust from being kicked up in your face, as well as dampen down the soil, which also prevents dust. And then always wash your hands after you're done working. So lastly, I'm just going to touch on a few hazards that are found in farming. So these are some of the biggest dangers in farming, according to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And again, some of these overlap with the gardening and carpentry exposures. So pesticides and toxic exposures are a big one in farming. There are many different chemicals used with both livestock and crops that you need to know how to use them properly. And then heavy equipment dangers, as you can see here, is a tipped over tractor, which can cause serious injury or death to the operator. So it's important to be aware of those. Prolonged sun exposure, again, leading to heat exhaustion, heat stroke. Acquired animal diseases. Livestock carry different diseases than humans, but they can pass along some of those diseases to those that work closely with them. So it's important to be aware of that. Confined spaces are another big problem in farming, like a silo, a grain bin, or a grain elevator. And so this infographic over here on the right depicts something called grain engulfment and entrapment. So in a grain elevator, if one is not properly secured, it takes 2 to 3 seconds to realize what's happening, 4 to 5 seconds until you're trapped, and then 22 seconds until you're completely covered in the grain, and you can suffocate this way. Falls are also a problem in farming, as well as the heavy loads that can cause musculoskeletal injuries, excessive noise from equipment, as well as burns. If you do a controlled burn of a field, it's important that you are aware of your surroundings so you don't pose a threat to yourself or others. So things to watch out for, you need to ensure that proper precautions are taken when working in confined spaces. Secure yourself to the silo so that you do not get engulfed. Verify that those operating heavy equipment are qualified to do so, that they know how to drive the tractor, etc., and avoid injury that way. You need to be respectful of the animals that you work with because they could kick you, trample you, etc. And they do pose a danger if they are not handled properly. So ways to protect yourself, according to the Great Plains Center for Agricultural Health, include things such as being aware of your surroundings when you operate heavy equipment, the people around you, as well as where you're driving, etc. Knowing the pesticides and chemicals you're using, the proper usage and precautions that must be made. For example, if you have to dilute a product or mix it with something else, how to use it is very important to avoid any toxicity. Wearing proper protection is also important. So boots that protect your feet, long sleeves, long pants, hats, and gloves can protect you from bugs in the sun. And sunscreen and bug spray is important. And then you need to inspect yourself after working for any bites or ticks. And again, be aware of the animals around you. And then it's also important to keep your tools clean and organized to prevent any mechanical issue on the part of tools. And then on the right here is a lifeline system setup for working in a silo. So if you notice, the worker is harnessed into a lifeline that is attached with a pulley to the roof of the silo, and then another worker has a wall anchor. And so even if the person were to get trapped, they could be pulled back up. So again, these were just a few of the dangers that are posed in construction, gardening, and farming. It is by no means an exhaustive list, but it's just a starting point to think about those things and then be able to protect yourself better. These are the references that were used, and I thank you for your time.